I trust you, Stevie.
You know you can trust me.
Good. Because there's something I want you to know. Jimmy Bulger is, without a doubt, a very unique individual. And that needed to be portrayed, that needed to be exposed.
It's an alliance.
The more my sort of jaw dropped on the floor with the script, the more I thought, is this really what happened? And then excavating the kind of truth of the story was equally enticing.
As an actor, I choose my point of view, and Scott, as a filmmaker, chooses his point of view. You gather as much information as you can, and you pick a line. Whether it's the full truth, it makes for a great story.
Truth is often stranger than fiction, and there were many different vantage points from all the different players, and the truth seemed to be elusive.
I'm a fucking dead man!
I had been aware of Whitey for some time, well before I came onto the project. When you grow up on the East Coast like I did in Virginia, you understand that he's such a notorious gangster, and I didn't really know much more until I started researching the project and delving into the screenplay and understanding the very full and rich story that Black Mass presents.
I'd met Scott before, and I'd seen his first film, Crazy Heart. And I was blown away by the filmmaking, by the choices. So I really wanted to work with Scott.
Make him an offer for the company. Tried.
We met and talked about the film and the idea, and both felt real good about working with one another.
One of the things that Scott said to me that I loved is he'd read the previous versions of the script and really liked it, but he felt like they were kind of gangsters that sometimes were humans.
Right, that's enough.
And what he really wanted to bring was to show them as people first, and then slightly pivot the point of view, and then show them as what they were doing.
We good?
Yeah, we could. Put him in the trunk.
You need a really skillful and extremely intelligent director to figure out how to make a movie work where there's no good guy. And in our movie, there's no real good guy. There's some people who had good intentions who end up being bad guys, and then there's a lot of bad guys.
Roger Wheeler.
So to pull off making a movie with all of these characters who have real arcs and start at one place and another, but without one of them as your hero to see through that guy's eyes is a hard thing to do, and Scott managed those waters great.
I think as an audience member, sure you want certain facts, but if you want just the facts, then you're probably better off watching a documentary or a news program. But if you want psychological truth, and you want emotion, and you want heart, then you try to tell the story from a very human standpoint and hope that it really maintains a very compelling sense of narrative and a connection that the audience will have with what I think are extremely interesting characters.
Do you feel like maybe you want to tell me what happened in school yesterday?
Whitey's story is so vast that in so many different periods that you could tell it in an 8-part series, truly. And you have to find out, okay, what are the milestones in his life, whether it's the loss of a son,
No change.
or whether it's his relationship with Roger Wheeler down in Miami in terms of High Lie, but also how do you gain a better understanding of his relationships with his brother Billy, with his mom, with Stephen Flemmi or John Martirano or Tommy King. Also to really understand his relationship with John Connolly of the FBI and all the people that interweave throughout the narrative and are part of this fabric of South Boston. So there was a lot really to choose from. You have to really make these choices when you're telling a 2-hour narrative. And in my meetings with the Boston FBI, and of course with the 2 authors of Black Mass, Gerard O'Neill and Dick Lair, who, as we know, are esteemed former reporters for the Boston Globe, that they really knew what was important in Whitey's life, because those 2 gentlemen reported on Whitey and his cohorts for decades, 2 or 3 decades.
Gerard O'Neill, Boston Globe.
Dick Lair, same.
I felt the script was vital because it had to get into the relationship with the FBI and how it gave Whitey Bulger a license to kill. And happily, the script was terrific.
We know.
And you're running it?
We wouldn't be here if we weren't.
Scott wanted to make it very clear to me that he really cared about the story and getting it right in terms of the spirit of it, what I'm calling the darkness of the black mass of it all. And over time, he certainly won me over in terms of following through on that and taking the time to talk about things, ask questions along the way, whether it was Scott or Johnny Depp or some of the other actors. They all impressed in terms of their work ethic and trying to get it right in a cinematic sense.
It's really just about spending time in South Boston and hearing all of these different stories and then talking to the authors of Black Mass and saying, does this feel like it's accurate? So they were a wonderful sounding board as to, really kind of orienting the North Star of the project. And did this happen? Does this feel authentic? Because you often are taking some liberties with the film. And the only liberties we really took are just for narrative's sake, some of the timeline of when events maybe occurred and when they didn't, so that you could tell the story in a linear fashion without it bumping in any way and just making it more interesting. But in terms of all of the characterization and their personalities and their interactions with the FBI community or with South Boston community or with one another, those are all very accurate.
Look what crawled out of the gutter.
Good afternoon, Officer Flynn. What happened? I must have been doing 30 and 25. You gonna lock me up for life or something?
A lot of times you read about notorious figures or gangsters, and they tend to be one or two dimensions at best. And Whitey was multi-dimensional. He's cunning, charming, extremely bright.
I think he had this charismatic, mysterious draw that people just wanted to get close to him. They wanted to try to understand him. They wanted to know him. He also has an amazing ability to be able to shift things in his direction.
Ain't your neighborhood, Whitey?
Is that right?
We've all seen gangster pictures or movies in general in which at the center of the picture is a nefarious character that really isn't humanized. And it was important for me to understand him as the head of this criminal empire, but also to understand his relationship with the city, because we're all shaped by our environments. And he was shaped by the sense of code in South Boston, a very insular community, Irish-American, who all really stuck very closely together. And really the sense that where you're born and the neighborhood in which you're raised, or the city in which you're raised, really informs your choices.
Jimmy?
Good morning, Ma.
How was work?
It was long. I gotta get some sleep, sweetheart.
The humanization of the gangster, it's not to create an unbalanced empathy or understanding, I don't think. And it's not to try and specifically toy with an audience's point of view. But I think, in the post-Sopranos era, we know that it's not all about big sort of shootouts and sort of operatic moments in lives. There's a minutia, there's a domestic reality. These people lived in a very small community. They all knew one another. And those lines between public and private lives blur. They just blur, just because of the proximity of them.
When you're in Boston, most everybody has a Whitey Bulger story, and everybody's 1 degree separated from Whitey. Whether that's truth or not, I found it extremely compelling, because many people look upon him as this really mythical man who brought a lot of notoriety on one hand to the city of Boston, but also a sense of pride for a lot of people in South Boston.
I live and breathe. It's Jimmy. When did you get out of Alcatraz?
That's nearly 10 years ago now, Mrs. Corey.
Well, it's wonderful to have you back in the neighborhood, son.
It was a close-knit neighborhood. Everybody grew up there. Southie. Everybody grew up kind of idolizing Jimmy Bulger. Everybody grew up wanting to be him in a way, because he did things his own way, and he, for the most part, won.
Slouchy. Sly Jack.
Many people in the neighborhood of South Boston revered him and thought of him often as a Robin Hood figure. So that added a layer of intrigue and mystery to me that I found fascinating.
Hey, what's going on, Jimmy? Need me to jump in?
Nah, we got it, buddy.
I wanted to see that status, but I also wanted to really understand on a very granular level what motivated him, what drove him, and why he became the man that he became. And then to find out that he had a son that no one really knew about apart from his brother and maybe one of his close confidants. But the fact that this was a man who played everything close to the vest, and in most instances was a man who was very calm and very collected until he was crossed or didn't get what he wanted. And when you lose your son, like he does in the film, and you lose your mother and all these things that are very close to him, then it has darker repercussions for those around him and just his inner life. And I really wanted to mine that territory, and I just thought that he presented to me and to the reader of Black Mass or the world at large an extremely fascinating character. I really wanted to explore as much as we could Whitey and his brother Billy. Understanding that notion of brotherhood was really important.
Jimmy basically went this way, Billy went this way. Billy ends up this very highfalutin politician, and Jimmy ends up king of the underworld. Yet, they had family dinners, they go to church, they visit their mom, was still respectful, even though they were on very distinctly different sides.
Jen. Come on, not again.
And how in a very, very small and insular city does one not know what the other's doing? I always found that dynamic extremely interesting. How one would uphold the law and the rule of law and help legislate, why one was either taking advantage of that or hoping that his brother didn't know. So I thought that was something that you don't quite see in narratives.
Never heard this house so quiet.
The idea that from the same womb these two political polar opposites came into being is just sort of really fascinating and almost Shakespearean, you know, and great seed for some great drama. I mean, it's the stuff of legend, this story.
Cheer for these boys! Come on now!
I think what we've tried to do as the storytellers of this incredible bit of history is to look at the private relationship, not to intimate that there was more or less that was, you know, known to either party, or that either party had influence over the other's outcome, whether Whitey was protecting Billy or Billy was protecting Whitey. Kind of leave that alone a little bit and actually just focus on the fact that they were two brothers who loved each other very deeply, and let an audience come to their own conclusions about how much connivance, if any, there was between those two worlds, the legal and the illegal, so to speak.
Regardless, as you see in the film, especially in the last moments of the film, when Whitey's just about to leave Boston.
Hey, Billy boy.
And Billy asks him, is there any other way that we can do this, that we can handle what you've done? And he says, there isn't another way. And you get a sense, in which was the truth, that these brothers who were very close and grew up in this very insular community would never likely see one another again. And perhaps not even stay in touch, but as we saw with what happened with Billy Bulger, that they did. And of course, the truth is always stranger than fiction.
This is John.
Connolly. Jimmy.
And then when you have a childhood friend or an acquaintance in John Connolly, who rises to become the special agent in charge of the FBI, Whitey, being as smart and cunning as he was, saw a real opportunity for him to grow his criminal empire.
Fucking FBI, John.
I can help you, Jimmy, and you can help me.
I enjoyed the complexity of playing a character who, on paper, his actions could be perceived as bad. He could be perceived as just a bad guy. But why John was doing what he was doing is fascinating to me. And my choice in playing him was a certain level of emulation and narcissism that made it not too difficult for him to blur that line.
As we examine John in our film, at the beginning of the picture, you get a strong sense that he's a very good person with the right, strong moral code, who then becomes corrupted by the system, corrupted by Whitey Bulger, and a man who is filled by and driven by greed and avarice and hubris, and who really wanted to be, in a sense, a gangster like Whitey and Flemmy and Martirano, but chose a different path.
Jimmy, where the fuck you been? I've been looking for you everywhere.
Ooh, hey.
John started to take on the sheen of a gangster. I think he started to feel an enjoyment of being a part of that world.
And I think one of the things that's important to note is that in this era of South Boston in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, that there's a very fine line between lawmen and criminals. And these lawmen and these criminals are virtually indistinguishable.
And in the movie, we see John kind of hustling to try and satisfy the brief of being an FBI agent, but also satisfying the brief of being able to kind of rub shoulders with gangsters. And unfortunately, his aspirations lead him to, you know, bad worlds.
We are fucked. Now we're stuck with Whitey, and without the Italians, nobody can rein him in, and we can't even pull on his chain because we're in too deep, and he knows it.
When you have a couple of rogue agents, it infects the larger group, and we know that it's one of the largest scandals in FBI history, and a black eye on what we know to be, you know, one of our great institutions, the FBI, and I think it was very difficult for those people to deal with that when you have a couple of bad apples. Even today, the FBI, there are a certain group of people who thought John Connolly was very effective at what he was doing, which was bringing in someone from the neighborhood who's an informer to help bring down a larger criminal empire in the Italian mafia. So people felt that John Connolly was an extremely good FBI agent. He just happened to live on both sides of the law. When Whitey was ultimately arrested, and more things came out in the trial from those who testified against him, we were able to thread those through the narrative, understanding that perhaps Kevin Weeks was present when Deborah Hussey was murdered by Whitey. Kevin Weeks giving us information as to what is referred to in the film, and as they referred to it as the Bulger burial ground. And we shot right there where many of the bodies were dumped and found and exhumed, which always adds a level of authenticity and verisimilitude to any shoot.
I think Scott certainly understood, we both agreed right off the bat that there was no way to not shoot this in Southhaven. There was no way to not shoot this in the exact places that it happened in, for the most part.
Shooting Black Mass literally on the stomping grounds of where it took place was just an exhilarating experience, because every day something came up that you weren't quite sure about.
It was everything to be there. It was everything to be in that environment and to hear those people and to watch them, learn from them, and also to have been welcomed to the degree that we were.
I want to thank the residents of South Boston for welcoming us into the community with such open arms. The actors were so involved in these characters. Many of them would spend time in Southie, or many of them would talk to people who knew these men well, or the people who actually they were portraying.
They were very proactive in navigating their way through those old neighborhoods. They all started to become friends with different neighborhood types who still had connections and memories, and the fellow travelers of Whitey's gang and the Winter Hill gang. So there were no barriers in re-entering that world and kind of recalling it for the film.
They would come back the following day and tell us all of these stories, and on certain occasions we would try to inject that into the screenplay at the last minute. So you never quite knew what you were going to get on a given day.
I don't want to be presumptuous. I don't want to tell you what to do. But maybe it's time that you consider cultivating some friends.
You know what I do to rats, John?
I don't tend to rehearse my actors. I don't have rehearsal before we start shooting. I didn't on my first two films, and I certainly didn't on this one. Because when you do that, you don't tend to have moments between action and cut that are spontaneous, because oftentimes I feel that performances which are really important to me tend to become stale, or they tend to become over-rehearsed. And when you are shooting a film, certainly with characters that are lurking in the streets of Boston, or on a couple of occasions, who might have been watching us shooting a scene about those particular people, that's always intoxicating but unnerving. And the actors approach the material differently when they know they're portraying real people, and real people who, again, are now a part of the community who once were imprisoned. So all of that type of energy and neuroses and fear that it might infect into the cast or inject it into just the proceedings in general, it's this kind of heightened state of energy that everybody brings to the production that really focuses everybody in kind of a laser-like way, and then in between action and cut, this kind of magic would occur. So thank you so much. Let's have a safe shoot. And again, South Boston, thanks for your hospitality. As you see the end of the film, and I'll start with John Connolly first, John Connolly, because of this notion of loyalty, is the only one who didn't turn state's evidence. Yet, he got 40 years in prison. Kevin Weeks and John Martorano and Stephen Flemmi did speak with the DEA and ultimately the U.S. government, and they received reduced sentences, and a couple of them, Mr. Weeks and Martorano, now walk the streets of Boston today, and John Connolly is sitting in prison, and he withstood that code, that sense of honor. He upheld that people are so prideful of in South Boston. Whitey claims, of course, as we've heard, that he never murdered women and that he wasn't a rat. Was Whitey an informer? Well, the FBI showed me a 700 or 800 page dossier that said that he was an informer. He didn't give them much. That we know. He mostly was taking from the FBI as opposed to giving them information. I think he perhaps did help bring down Angiulo, as we see in the film. But Whitey really believes that he wasn't a rat because, of course, in prison and everywhere else, if you were a rat or if you murder young women, then people don't look very kindly upon that. But the FBI did show me evidence of both of those instances. The interesting thing about Black Mass is that you come at the truth from many different perspectives. And as a filmmaker, it's always very difficult to ascertain what the truth is because there's so many different versions of the truth. So you try to parse all of these different experiences to try to get to the truth because people always tend to, almost in a Rashomon effect, remember things differently. The actual truth, only Whitey Bulger or John Martorano or Kevin Weeks or Stephen Flemmi really know because those are the gentlemen that committed these crimes and lived these lives. And it's a story that I think over the course of time and history will continue, much like an onion, to reveal layers and layers and layers of the truth. But I think in the end that what we present as Black Mass is as truthful as I think we'll get.